Hello YouTube and welcome back to the Nerd Zone. And in this video I will explain to you why the AT-AT sucks. And we will also take a look at how the Empire uses it in battle. First of all, walkers of any kind are useless in combat if you're gonna look at it realistically. Uh, But who cares? They are really, really cool. So we accept it, right? Walkers are awesome. Of course they are. So yeah, walkers into combat, yes, do it. However, there are some problems with it, and beyond that, they just suck in combat. So we're gonna be taking a look at the AT-AT specifically. And we will check out the size and height, the lack of a turret, the legs, and dismounting the troops. So the size of the AT-AT creates an obvious problem. It can't hide. It can't make use of cover. So since it's so tall, you can spot it a mile away, like we saw at the Battle of Hoth. And this means it's kind of easy at a distance to aim at it and, open fire with your heaviest guns in order to counter the presence of the AT-AT. And you will obviously be aiming for the legs, the head, the neck if you have a flanking shot. And the closer it gets, the easier it will be to target the belly. So, and all of these positions you will be able to aim at them straight away since the AT-AT can't move around sneakily behind hills or in the cover of a forest and stuff like that. And to illustrate my point, I will use this very simple picture. You have two vehicles, the AT-AT on the left and a vehicle that does not have the AT-AT's legs on the right. And they use the same hill for cover, and you can see that the enemy vehicle can open fire at and look straight at all the vital locations on the AT-AT. The legs, the head, the neck, and belly. The AT-AT, on the other hand, it can't even see half of the enemy vehicle because it's hull down. It is protected by the hill. So the AT-AT is therefore forced to shoot at well-armored locations. Obviously, in a shootout, if they have the same guns and the same armor, in a shootout, the enemy vehicle will take out the AT-AT eventually. Right, moving on to the lack of a turret. The AT-AT has all of its big main guns in the head up front, so the head moves around to try and find targets. The problem is that this configuration means that the AT-AT has a very narrow field of fire up front. And if it wants to engage targets off to the sides, it needs to move around relying on its legs. And this takes time. We've seen in the movies and in the TV shows that AT-ATs, they are slow to turn. So narrow field of fire and slow to react to outflanking enemies. This means that the AT-AT is extremely vulnerable to being outflanked. And it's easy for the enemy to set up an ambush or outmaneuver the AT-AT in order to effectively overcome it on the battlefield. So if the AT-AT is advancing and they don't know that they're walking into an ambush, the enemy can just wait for the AT-AT to move up, move slightly past them, and they can start hitting it from the side, slightly to the rear, and the AT-AT can't respond. You can fire all day long until it goes down. So here you have it. The AT-AT is at an extreme disadvantage against a vehicle with a turret. It can be easily outmaneuvered, and if it finds itself in an ambush, it will be slow to react, and it will take time before the AT-AT can return fire. And if the enemy vehicle that we see here off to the right continues moving downwards on the picture, it can keep firing at the AT-AT by simply turning the turret while moving downwards. And this means, of course, that the AT-AT will not be able to fire a single shot at the enemy because it will be struggling to turn around in order to try and get the head to face the enemy, which it will never be able to achieve because the enemy will just keep moving out of the AT-AT's field of fire, maybe even be able to move in behind it and fire at its vulnerable rear, or close enough to pound it to hit it straight up at the belly section. And now to the defining feature of the AT-AT, the legs. It only has 4 legs, and this is why walkers don't work in combat when you really sit down and think about it. I mean, they look cool, they are awesome, and the AT-AT is an incredibly cool sci-fi vehicle. But walkers suck when you really start to think about it. Because if you take out a single leg on the AT-AT, it can't move. Then it's stuck. It won't be able to do anything. I mean, it could be due to incoming enemy fire, it could be malfunction, it breaks down, or it just can't handle a piece of terrain and gets stuck for some reason. It doesn't matter. If you lose a single leg on the AT-AT, it is out of action and can't do anything. And obviously, if it loses 2 legs, well, you know, it's gonna crash. It's gonna come down hard, and the people inside, like, yeah, they better be wearing seatbelts because that crash will be, yeah, they will hit the ground hard. The AT-AT is, of course, also a troop transport. All-terrain armored transport. It carries around 40 troops and even 5 speeder bikes. And so if you have troops on board this tall, big vehicle, how do you get them on the ground? How do you get the troops into combat? Well, the AT-AT, it is tall and it's a long way down. So how do you get down? Well, do you get down while the enemy is shooting at you, or well, how does this work? Because no matter how you twist and turn it, it's gonna be dangerous getting outside of an AT-AT in the middle of combat. So as far as I can figure it, there's 2 options, rappelling or kneeling. Rappelling, you open the side door on the AT-AT, and then the troops rely on ropes in order to quickly get down on the ground. And it is the quickest way to get out of the vehicle, so that alone makes sense. It makes tactical sense because you can dismount all the troops in relative quick order. But it also means that they will not be able to dismount in cover because the AT-AT is so large and so tall that you are in clear line of sight from the enemy to the enemy as you jump out and go down the rope. Sure, the AT-AT might angle itself so it is using its body to cover you, but still, there might be enemies on your flank and further away, and they get an angle on you and what have you. Either way, the AT-AT is big, it is large, it is stationary, and troops are now opening the side armor in order to get out. The AT-AT is an easy target, and the troops will be easy targets as they are standing in the open door and later on as they go down the rope to the ground. The other option, I guess, I think this is an option, kneeling. It makes sense because it would make it much more easier to load things on and off the AT-AT equipment, supplies, weapons, and what have you. It would also make it easier to store the vehicle inside of a starship, a Star Destroyer, or a dropship during transport. And also, if it can kneel, it means you could find a hill or a building, or you're in a forest, and then you can kneel down into cover, making it more safe for the troops to dismount, relying on the cover of the vehicle and the cover of the obstacle between you and the enemy. But it kind of feels like this would be time consuming, right? Waiting for the whole thing to lower down into position before you can then open a hatch and then get outside. And I mean, if you're the enemy and you see an AT-AT stop and then it slowly lowers, then you know it's about to dismount troops. So why not call in artillery, mortar fire, airstrikes, and what have you? Because you know in a couple of minutes, a couple of seconds, there will be a lot of infantry running around, and they are prime targets for mortars and artillery. So as you can see, it's not fun being a stormtrooper inside of an AT-AT, because either one of these choices puts you at great risk, simply because the vehicle is so damn large, it's so tall, you can't dismount safely. Because whatever happens, the enemy will know that's where the AT-AT is, that's where the troops will be dismounting, that's where we will open fire and kill them. So, in conclusion, an AT-AT will more than likely lose a leg as it is advancing towards the enemy, and it will do this at great distance. The reason being that the legs are obvious targets and easy targets, and the AT-AT it's so tall that it cannot hide or make use of cover, so the enemy will obviously bring in everything they have, target the legs at great distance, and then just keep shooting until, you know, the AT-AT loses a leg. And you know, at that point, it's stuck. It can't move. So then you can move on to shoot at a second AT-AT or a second leg. And when that second leg is taken care of, the entire thing comes crashing down. Should an AT-AT survive long enough, it will more than likely later on be outmaneuvered by the enemy vehicles that are relying on turrets. The AT-AT will be unable to quickly turn around to engage enemies who are moving around it, and the enemy in turn can target the AT-AT's legs, head, neck, or belly as they please. All they have to do is move up on the enemy's flank, on the Imperial's flank, and then target the best location to shoot at, preferably the neck, I would assume, if you're at medium distance shooting at an AT-AT from the side, then I would definitely aim at the neck, sever the head, and then the AT-AT is useless. Not only is it taken out of action, it can't shoot, it can't move, the troops inside can basically do nothing. Now, with everything said, how does the Empire deploy the AT-AT? And well, we've actually seen a glimpse of it during the Battle of Hoth. We have seen a glimpse of Imperial Armored Tactics, AT-AT tactics, on the screen in the movie When the Empire Strikes Back. And we can actually see the Empire relying on tactics and formations. And when you take a look at it, it appears to make some sense, to be honest. So, despite all of its failings, shortcomings, and flaws, maybe the AT-AT does fill an important role for the Empire on the field of battle. So this is basically the formation we see the Empire rely on Hoth. They deploy 5 AT-AT in a pentagon formation, which is, to be honest, a bit clever. Uh, So first of all, the formation allows all 5 AT-AT to engage targets up front if they have proper spacing. And it basically allows the 2 trailing AT-AT to support the point AT-AT, right, in targeting things up front, and then the 2 on the flanks can sort of engage targets more off to the sides, which is kind of clever. And also, the 2 trailing AT-AT are in a good position to react to potential flanking moves by the enemy. So they are in fact protecting the 3 AT-AT up front. So they are still vulnerable to flanking attacks, obviously, because they are slow and the head is all they can use to shoot with. But it makes it much more difficult for the enemy to effectively outflank the Imperials. Because if they try to outflank the 3 first AT-ATs, well, then the 2 trailing ones, they can take a sidestep and turn the head and engage targets off to the flanks. And if the enemy wants to outflank the 2 trailing AT-ATs, well, then they can't outflank the 3 up front. So then you engage the 2 in the rear, but that leaves the 3 up front free to continue to attack or to turn around and adjust to attack the flanking element. So it makes a lot of sense. And we see this in the movie if we take a closer look at how the AT-ATs are positioned and how they are advancing. And in the same battle, the Battle of Hoth, we also see briefly that the AT-ATs are accompanied by AT-STs. I think it's one AT-ST we see walking past. But let's assume there's more than one AT-ST taking part in the battle. And I mean, it makes sense. It makes tactical sense because they can be used. I mean, they are all-terrain scout transports, right? You can use them out on the flanks to protect the AT-ATs. So since they are able to detect enemies trying to outflank the Imperials, and they can even be used to engage light infantry and light vehicles and what have you. So this makes it even more difficult for the enemy to outmaneuver the Imperials and trick them into walking into an ambush and what have you. So if the AT-STs, they spot enemies, then the AT-ATs can adjust accordingly. So if you have enemies out on the right flank, the two rightmost AT-ATs, they can just turn over that way and engage them and let the rest of the formation continue forward towards the enemy position. And not only that, each AT-AT carries 5 speeder bikes, which of course allows every AT-AT to send out scouting parties far ahead to scout and locate enemy positions well ahead of time. So it allows the Imperials to potentially detect ambushes before they walk into them. And it allows them to scout out and evaluate prepared positions at an early stage. And it also allows the Imperials to potentially keep an eye on enemy maneuver elements. If the enemy walkers, enemy tanks, what have you, are moving around trying to outmaneuver the Imperial presence, well, then you have the scout speeder bikes able to track them, follow them, report back to the officers. So the AT-ATs can move into a favorable position before the battle has even begun. And of course, last but not least, each AT-AT carries up to 40 stormtroopers. So between 5 AT-ATs in this formation that we saw them rely on Hoth, that is 200 troops. And I mean, all things combined, this is a very powerful battalion, combined arms battalion. And it brings a lot of firepower and varied firepower. And, you know, it has a lot of tactical flexibility with all these different vehicles and troops involved. And they are more than capable of dealing with most threats that they will come across on the battlefield. So the scout speeder bikes, they are deployed ahead of the unit, and they will find the enemies before the shooting starts. Then you have the AT-ATs and AT-STs that can maneuver in accordance to what the speeder bikes have told them. The AT-STs are protecting the flanks, making sure that no one sneaks in and does some funky, sneaky stuff that no one was thinking of. And then you have the AT-ATs who can pound the enemy positions with their big guns, and when they deploy troops, the troops can move in and clear out trench lines, foxholes, buildings, and what have you. So all things combined, I mean, the AT-ATs can take out heavy targets, AT-STs can take out light vehicles, and the troops can secure ground, can gain territory, they can clear out bunkers, bases, buildings, and you know, it is a good mix of vehicles, troops, and capability. And incredibly enough, I think it makes a lot of sense, this setup, despite all the flaws we have with the AT-AT, and don't get me started on the AT-ST only having 2 legs. With everything said and done, the AT-AT is still a flawed vehicle. So what should the Empire have done? The AT-AT should have a lower profile so it could make better use of cover, and so that it could be able to hide and rely on hills and terrain features to offer greater protection. And it also needs a turret, because if you're down behind a hill with your main body, then all you need to do is get the turret over the ridge line, and then you can shoot all day long at the enemy without putting yourself at great risk. And like I pointed out, 4 legs is just, you're setting yourself up for disaster. So you need 6 or 8 legs. More legs the better, because then you can still be effective even after you lose 1 leg. And in the case of the AT-AT, you would be definitely be able to be more effective even if you lost 2 legs, because if the AT-AT in its current configuration loses 2 legs, it is done. It will come crashing down and it is destroyed. If you have 8 legs and you lose 2 legs, you can still maneuver. So, in short, the Empire should have built a modern, all-terrain tactical enforcer that we saw the clone armies use during the Clone Wars. That is a very good walker design. Very good. And it is, to be honest, a superior design compared to the AT-AT. You just need to put the AT-AT guns on it, and you need to put the AT-AT armor on top of it. So if the Empire did that, then they would have had a really, really good walker design, and it would make a lot of sense. And goddamn, the rebels would have had major issues dealing with that type of walker. Definitely. So that's all I have for you in this video. I hope you found it interesting, and I hope you stuck with me to the end, and that I made some sense, and maybe it was even a bit enjoyable. Who knows? And yeah.